Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing on this exceptionally important topic. I believe the Communist government of China bears enormous responsibility and enormous culpability for this global pandemic we're seeing. China's conduct can be understood at two different phases. Number one, China's conduct concerning the origin of this pandemic, and number two, China's conduct after the beginning of this outbreak. Let's talk about the origin. There are a lot of questions that have not yet been answered. What we do know is in Wuhan, China, where this pandemic began, there were not one but two state-owned and state-controlled laboratories that were both studying not just coronaviruses, but coronaviruses derived from bats, from a species of bat that is not found within 800 miles of Wuhan, the same species of bat that now the scientists tell us they believe this virus may have originated with. Senator from Connecticut responded to that, as some in the media have responded, by saying there's no evidence that this virus was created in a laboratory. I agree with you. I've heard no evidence that suggests this virus was created in a laboratory. What there is substantial evidence and circumstantial evidence to conclude is that one or both of these laboratories were studying this virus, and that the virus may have accidentally escaped from those laboratories. One of those two labs was within a few hundred yards of the wet market where the first outbreak occurred. We also know that prior to this pandemic, there were multiple U.S. State Department cables raising concerns that these labs had exceptionally shoddy security protocols, and raising concerns specifically that because of their poor security, there was a real risk of a global pandemic originating from these labs. Now, as I noted, we don't know that for sure. Part of the reason we don't know for sure is the Chinese government's behavior after the outbreak was to go into these labs and destroy all their prior samples, which I have to tell you, having litigated a lot of cases, when you see someone destroying evidence and trying to hide the scientific record, it raises a pretty strong inference that the evidence they're destroying shows something they don't want people to know. The second phase of Chinese culpability we do know more facts about, which is their cover-up. Regardless of whether this originated in nature or this was a naturally occurring virus that was being studied in a Chinese lab that escaped accidentally, regardless of which origin is true, we know that the Communist government of China actively covered up and silenced early intervention to stop this pandemic. There were heroic Chinese physicians, whistleblowers who stood up and blew the whistle on this pandemic, who stood up and said, this is really dangerous, we need to stop it. And the Chinese Communist government, they came in, they arrested the whistleblowers, they silenced them, they punished them. Had the Chinese government behaved like any responsible government, had they come in, sent in health professionals to Wuhan and quarantined the infected people, there is a very real possibility that this could have been contained as a regional outbreak rather than a global pandemic. But instead, because of the lies of the Chinese Communist government, because of the censorship, because of the cover-up, we have today over 474,000 people who have died worldwide. We have over 123,000 Americans who have died, and the Chinese Communist government bears direct responsibility for those deaths and for the trillions of dollars of economic devastation that has flowed. Now, this hearing is focused on, so what next? And my question for the witnesses is, in your judgment, what is the best path forward to achieve two things? Number one, a clear, objective, trustworthy accounting of China's culpability. That accounting would, among other things, answer the questions about the labs. Were they studying this specific coronavirus? We know they were studying coronaviruses from bats. They refused to answer whether they were studying this virus. what's the best way to achieve an accounting, number one? And number two, what's the best way to achieve accountability? Because we know they're responsible for the cover-up. What is the best way to ensure that they are held accountable for the deaths and devastation that resulted from their misconduct? And if we can go through each of the witnesses, and we'll start, Professor Keitner, you could start us, and then we'll go from there.
Can I just amend your question and say, what's the best way to deter future behavior?
Amen. Let's make it a three-part question.
Thank you, Senator Cruz, and I find myself agreeing wholeheartedly with virtually everything you've said. But the available avenue of relief that we keep hoping for is not in U.S. courts. I'm a former trial lawyer. I used to work with some tobacco partners who were in the business before I was, and so I missed that opportunity.
But if I can ask, what is the best avenue?
So I teach civil procedure and evidence. We will not be able to get in a U.S. court proceeding, even if Missouri antitrust law and consumer law applied to China, which it doesn't. We would not.
Okay, I'm going to try again to see if I can get you to answer my question about what is the best avenue. You're saying what you think isn't.
Correct, because I feel like there's a false hope and a false conception here of what a U.S. proceeding would do. What a U.S. proceeding would not do is get information. What an international investigation would do is put sufficient pressure on China in combination with the sanctions that we have already started to levy, in combination with intelligence sharing and boots on the ground, if we can send public health experts back to China where they were to begin with, and when we pulled them out, as Senator Feinstein said, that is what will give us answers, and that is what will enable us to respond to the next pandemic the way we did to Ebola.
Okay.
When it broke up in West
Professor
Africa,
Miller.
we led a response.
Senator Cruz, I think we should pursue, as my colleague suggests, an international independent commission, but I don't think that would exclude a robust inquiry by domestic institutions, a commission in the domestic space as well. I think those could operate in tandem. I am less pessimistic about the civil process's ability to both set a narrative about what needs to be accomplished and develop some evidence, or at the very least, the expertise, scientific expertise we would need to discover the truth of this case. And I would add that that combination of tools, a domestic commission, participation in an international commission, backed by civil litigation, might be the kind of framework that would point towards the last part of your questions, bringing in the chairman's question, both accountability and a hope for preventing something like this happening in the future. That is, these commissions have to be backed by some legal mechanism. Now, I would add not only the civil litigation possibility, but the legal mechanism of public international law as well. So I would like to see both investigation, but supported by the enforceability of a legal mechanism.
Okay, General Fitch.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. The strongest way that we can move forward is with legal action and discovery. We've got to hold China accountable. And so if we go after them for the monetary damages and civil penalties, that's going to be crucial. But what we also do is we deter continued and similar bad acts. So I am very much in favor of moving for a very strong legal posture in this regard to hold China accountable.
Thank you. That was helpful.